Hey Matrix Live, we're here with Brendan Abolivier.
Yeah, that's me.
That's you. Welcome. We're actually live and in person because the pandemic's over and we're not in lockdown anymore. No, it's not over, but we are allowed to come to the office. So you've been working on some cool stuff.
Yep.
What is this?
So I've been spending some weeks lately working on reworking the module interface in Synapse. So if you're not already aware, Synapse is our reference implementation of a matrix server, and you can expand Synapse's functionality with third-party modules, basically plugins that you can write in Python to expand, to add more functionality, to do more stuff, to check for spam, etc. And so I'm going to explain how the existing module interface works in Synapse and why it's problematic and how we've kind of fixed that, and we are still fixing that to some extent. For starters, let's see what a module is. Basically just a Python package that's going to implement callbacks, which are just functions that Synapse will call when performing specific operations. You've got multiple module types, like the spam checker, which is probably the most well-known one, which allows server admins the module basically to check whether an event contains spam, or a user is spammy and should be shadow banned or denied registration.
Does that come before or after the DAG?
Before.
Okay.
So the spam checker can tell the server that event is spammy, don't persist it.
Got it. Okay. Good.
And you've got the Auth provider that extends Synapse's login capability, so authentication capabilities. You've got additional web resources to allow attaching new web resources, web endpoints to Synapse's web server. And other things like presence router to do funky things with presence, third-party event rules to add some authentication rules to matrix events, and so on and so on. And the main issue with the system we've got is we've got so many module types, and we're constantly adding new module types, and each of those module types are completely isolated from each other. So it's not very possible to implement, and it's not possible to implement multiple types in the same module in a clean way.
Okay.
Because of that isolation. That's both in the config file. So you've got if you want for example, you want your spam checker to also implement a web endpoint on Synapse's web server. You would need to duplicate the configuration of your module, because the module needs to appear in both the spam checker config section of the config and the additional resources of the config. And if you wanted to also do some things around presence and event rules, you need to duplicate that even more, and that kind of ties into the fact that the instantiation of modules is also isolated. So in that case of the module implementing multiple types, you're going to have each type that the module implements being instantiated as a separate module.
That makes sense. So what's an example of a module that would need multiple types?
Just for example, if your module implements an endpoint implements an endpoint that needs to be exposed on Synapse's web server.
Okay.
For example, or to go a bit further than the existing module types, one of the things I'm currently working on is splitting out the account validity feature of Synapse, which allows you to say after X time remind this user send an email to this user, and they need to click it within that period of time to keep the account active.
Yep. Okay.
And we're trying to split that into a new module type, but that means that if we want to keep the current implementation available as a module, we need the module to implement that module type, but also the web resource type.
Okay. Okay.
You could also think of like a spam checker that needs to be like a kind of super thing where it also implements some event rules, event authentication rules on top of that, and so in which case you need to tie into another type on top of the spam checker, which is the third-party event rules.
Got it. Yeah.
And so the issue with the current system is for each type that your module implements, it's going to be instantiated another time.
Yeah.
And so, for example, if I want my account validity module to be correctly to work, it's going to have one class, one instance of my class that's going to be called for all the callbacks, and a second instance of my class that's going to be called for the web requests, and it prevents and so the issue with that is you can have a hard time. Well, it's very difficult to have all these instances sharing data with one another, whether it's config or state or anything.
Globals.
Yeah, you could use globals, but it's not a very clean way. Yeah. And it's it comes with many other issues. One of them is that we're constantly adding more module types. And therefore it's getting quite difficult to keep track of all of them.
Okay.
For example, until a few weeks ago, half of the backend team had completely forgotten that it was possible for a module to implement new web resources.
Right.
Okay. And it's very difficult to properly implement because each module type is kind of inconsistent with each other because it's its own isolated way, and so some modules can implement some module types can support only one module for that type. Some can support multiple at the same time, and so every time you need to hook into a different type, you're going to need to look into how that type is working, how this and that. Which is inconvenient.
How did we? I mean, without telling anybody off, how did we end up with this? If there are so many problems,
I think the way we ended up like this is because at first there was just one module type, which was probably the spam checker.
Right.
And then we kind of built on top of that without necessarily.
So we needed modules before we had a coherent type system.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, fair enough.
And we needed different types of modules because we were thinking, actually that module, it doesn't really make sense for that module to do this or that. For example, it doesn't make sense for the spam checker to be defining custom events and checking whether that event made sense in the state of the room and all that.
Right.
And another annoying issue with the current implementation is that if your module implements one type, it needs to implement all the callbacks in that type.
Okay.
And so you end up with, if you for example you want to write a spam checker, but you're only interested in checking events from spam, you don't care about registration, so that's ability to create room or whatever.
Yeah.
You've got your class, your Python class with your function check event for spam, and a bunch of functions that are just one-liners, just so Synapse doesn't fail in trying to call them.
Alright, so just dummy functions that need to be implemented.
Yeah, exactly, and plus, like in Synapse's internals, then when we need to add more functions, we need to add a whole layer of backwards compatibility to check if the function exists and all that.
Yeah.
So the current implementation is quite problematic for all those reasons and probably a few more. And so the way we're addressing this is in Synapse versus 1.37, which was released this week, if I'm not mistaken. Synapse introduces a new module interface that's going to allow modules to appear only once in the config file, so no more duplication. And because they appear only once in the config file, they're also instantiated only once, which solves all that issue. Also allows them to proactively register the callbacks and the web resources that they want. Because another issue is if your module implements many types, or if you allow a module to implement many types without while removing the notion of a module type, you might end up accidentally adding a method in your Python class that happens to have the same name as what would be expected as a callback.
Okay. Yeah.
And so we're fixing that by having modules in the constructor of the class proactively register the callbacks that they're going to implement, and the same thing for the web resources that they want to serve. They just, instead of registering an entire module just for the web resource, the module just registers the resource as a class that implements Twisted's resource interface in the constructor.
Okay, so this is a standard Twisted style constructor.
Yeah, the resources are Twisted style because the web server that Synapse runs is Twisted style. And so what that looks like is so an example like this, which is so a new module section of the configuration in the configuration file where my module, regardless of how many types it implements, appears only once, and you can see on the example module here that we've got the resource, the web resource here that just checks if a user appears in the evil user's configuration. And then we've got the actual module here that's going to check if prevent any evil user from creating a room, and then in the constructor it's going to register the web resource in this at this path and just instantiating it, and then registering the callback. So user may create room is this function, and then Synapse will do the right thing.
Great.
And so that's where we are right now. And so the next steps is currently only the spam checker has been migrated to that new system, and so the legacy spam checker interface has been deprecated as of Synapse 1.37.
That's early, no?
Yeah.
You've only just released the new one, but the old one's deprecated, no?
Well, yeah, because it's been deprecated, but it hasn't been removed yet.
Yeah.
So you can your existing modules using that interface will still continue to work until August 2021.
Got it.
So in a couple of months, and at which point we're going to completely remove it in a future Synapse version. And yeah, the plan generally is to port more module types to the new interface in upcoming releases, and we're also going to start looking into how to package modules. So, for example, currently it's a bit difficult for users of Debian packages and Docker images to run modules, and we're going to try to address that as part of that kind of focus on modules. And yeah, if you want some more info, there's a nice documentation page on that. I can actually just click here, and yeah, there's a nice documentation page on how to configure your module, how to write one, what callbacks are available, how to port your existing module, and just
what callbacks are available then?
So currently only the spam checker, and it's basically just the same spam checker callbacks as the previous interface.
Yeah.
With the only change that the callbacks now we're requiring now that the callbacks are asynchronous functions.
Okay.
But that's a fairly minor change. And so yeah, it's all very well documented here with an example on like how, which is basically what my example from before looked like.
Yes, well, presumably it all came from the same place.
Yeah.
So what are the next? The spam checker is the first thing to be added. What's coming next?
I think what's going to the next change that I would expect to land would be account validity, because we're already in the process of splitting that as a module,
right?
Okay. And as a module type, and so that will land directly on that new interface without going through like creating a legacy interface. And I think the third-party event rules interface is going to be the next one to be migrated over. And yeah, eventually we'll just end up having all the existing interface on that. If you want more details on how exactly that's been implemented, it's PR 10,062 on Synapse. And yeah, that's it.
Super.
Do you have any questions?
Well, I've been asking questions. Actually, I do have one question. What kind of things do people do with the third-party rules, and what's a nice example of that?
So one example we've got is something we're doing at Element for a customer because they want very specific rules on things that this or that server can do in this or that room. They also want more room types than just DM and public private. And so what we're doing with them is we wrote a third-party event rules module that defines a new state event, a custom state event that says this if the room is in so that event describes the state of the status of the room, so the the type of the room, quote unquote, and it also says, so if the type of the room is this or that, this event can be sent. This event cannot be sent. This event can be sent if it's following this pattern.
I see. Yeah. Cool.
And another feature we're working on for a couple of customers actually is the ability to, for example, freeze a room when a user leaves it.
Right.
When the last admin leaves it, and in which case we send another custom event to the room, and the module acts as like the gatekeeper that says if that event says the room is frozen, nobody can send an event until someone else has unfrozen it.
Okay. Is it expensive then? Because every time somebody leaves, you have to check, was this the last admin?
I mean, there are already a bunch of checks that happen anywhere when the user leaves. In Synapse, like in any other matrix server, any state event requires. Any event requires authentication to see if it can be sent.
Fair enough. Yeah. Okay.
So that just adds another rule set on top of that.
Fine. Yeah, it's not as bad as it sounds. All right. Super. Is that everything for this topic?
I think so.
Is there anything else you want to say to Matrix Live?
Don't think so.
All right.
You put me on the spot.
Sorry, didn't warn you about that one.
It's alright.
Thank you, Brendan. Thanks very much.
Thank you for the invite. And
bye now.
Bye bye.